afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our work session this evening. Our work session is dedicated to the presentation by Dr. Boone and staff on our budget. We've had a series of events that have kind of brought us up to this point. We've had a public hearing. We intend to have another public hearing scheduled for March the 6th, and more discussions on the budget at that meeting. We have a meeting earmarked on March the 13th for budget discussion, and then we have our formal board meeting on the 20th, which will also have some time cut out for budget discussion. It's important to note that as we're in the midst of this discussion, we're still taking feedback on the budget from various stakeholders. That can come in the form of email, that can come in the form of phone call, or public comment during our hearing, or public comment during the March 20th session. Also wanted to make a note that Mr. Clant is not here this evening. He's out of the state on business, so he will not be with us today. Dr. Boone, would you like to begin?
Thank you. And I apologize up front for my voice, and if it goes away, the good news is this is a team presentation, and so we'll go from there. Good afternoon, Dr. Gabriel, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to be able to present the fourth educational plan and budget to the Norfolk School Board as superintendent. Over the past several budgets, we've been able to accomplish a great deal, even as we've grappled with declining enrollments and state support of public education that still lags behind pre-recession levels. I certainly need to express appreciation to Mayor Alexander, City Manager Smith, and members of the City Council for their support during these very difficult economic times. As a result of the city assuming a greater share of the public educational costs while the state share lags, we've been able to accomplish several very large ticket items. Allow me to highlight a few of the accomplishments over these 3 to 4 budgets. We've been able to effectively eliminate structural imbalance in the budget that was a result of our having to use one-time funds from the city annually to balance the budgets. That meant each year we started with a true deficit in the budget because we had that hole. We've been able to implement phases 1 and 2 of the pay and comp study, with all employee groups last year having received roughly a 3.3% average increase. And again, this was accomplished, and as well as phase 1, this was also accomplished strictly with all city contributions because the state had not made any contributions toward the salaries that they support through the SOQ funded positions. Even though there was money in a couple of the budgets for that to happen, it never materialized. As a result of our very strong fiscal practices and improvement of our internal systems, we've received an exemplary financial audit this past January, and this is due to how we implement our budget and manage our revenue and funds over time. We continue to receive recognition of our budget through various entities for its focus on instruction as the core of how we develop the budget. We've also been able during these budget times to open 4.5 of the 5 PPEA schools at the elementary level, and I say 0.5 because the second phase of the Camp Allen construction is underway, and in about a year we'll declare victory on that. And so we've been able to accomplish. And these are just a few of the highlights. And we'll talk about some more as we do the actual budget presentation. Additionally, last year, the city's commitment of 2.7 cents of the 10-cent tax increase to NPS resulted in raising our base funding from the state by $5 million, which is ongoing revenue. The city's shared revenue funding model that's being implemented this year provided us a very good ballpark of expected new revenue, thus enhancing and facilitating our budget process in a very different way this year. We will talk specifically about those figures in just a few minutes. The proposed budget that I'm presenting to the board today certainly doesn't include everything that I would want on a wish list, everything that the board probably wants on the wish list, and everything that principals in the community and teachers would want on the wish list. But what it does do is preserve our progress on our redesign work, leading to greater number of students being successful academically, because they have highly qualified teachers in the classrooms with fewer long-term subs and vacancies, and where we're working to provide consistency in those schools that have the greatest level of teacher turnover, thus impacting stability and student outcomes. It is important to note that, again, as this budget, we look across all aspects of district operations for our efficiencies and in operations, so that we can drive as much of the cost of the revenue to the building levels, to the classrooms. But in an organization the size of Norfolk Public Schools, we cannot operate as though we're a mom and pop organization and leave our operational infrastructure to chance and wish we could if we had, and ignore what's necessary around technology for our payroll and student information systems and other work, as well as all of the systems of support that are designed to enhance what happens at school levels and to support overall school operations. We are able to accomplish a lot in the face of continued decline in enrollment, with the students at the center of how we accomplish this. And so, while again, it's not everything that everybody would want, I think it is a very reasonable presentation to the board, given our circumstances of enrollment, some level of uncertainty of state funding and inconsistency in terms of what we can expect, and our city working very hard to pick up the slack from the state. I want to express appreciation to the board members for participating in the 2x2 meetings to allow me an opportunity to share with you the basic framework of what we were putting together. Today you'll receive the full document with all of the line items and figures there. You know, previously I've talked with the board about a lot of uncertainty as it related to federal grants that are a big portion of our budget. We aren't hearing as much instability this year with our federal grants, but again, a portion of the budget had been approved, so we may be good through September, but we don't have visibility of what it looks like beginning October 1. So that always remains an area that we will be paying very close attention to. I want to express appreciation to Ms. Rhonda Ingram, our Chief Financial and Operations Officer, Ms. Pearl Toe, our Senior Director of Budget, and all members of the Budget Department, as well as the district's leadership team that create the district's core budget team. I also want to express appreciation to all of the department heads, the principals, and others who have now embraced the zero-based budgeting approach that we put in place, with the idea of it's not just about asking for more, but it's being able to justify what we need to be able to accomplish goals that we've put in place, and how do we get there. And so I am so proud of the district's leadership team and the way in which they have approached the budgeting process, including watching directors and others not take a territorial approach to the work that we do during our budget sessions, but rather to put the district redesign in place, our theory of action, and to say, this is what drives the district's work forward, even if I don't receive this in my budget. And so with that, Dr. Gabriel, I'll turn it over to Ms. Ingram, who will walk us through, and Ms. Toe will walk us through aspects of the budget that I am formally presenting to the school board today.
Thank you, Dr. Boone. Ms. Jackson, if you pull up PowerPoint, please. Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Boone. School board members, good afternoon. I will be sharing with you this afternoon a little bit more details about the superintendent's proposed budget. The first probably half of the presentation is information we have shared before with the board at various work session and given updates on the governor's budget. And I included that as well just to show the backdrop of the baseline for development of the budget. As normal, we always like to include the school board division and priorities in the front of our presentation because that is one of the main focuses that we attend to. Next slide. And the theory of action that the division developed with the help of focus schools. And that's basically is our promise to the students, the parents, and the community of what we are promising to do for the students of the city of Norfolk. The next slide is talking about the process. The budget process is almost an annual ongoing process. We started out in October where we gave the department heads instructions on developing or submitting their budget requests through our financial system in the budget office. And in November, the budget departments were prepared, and we held our first public hearing on November the 28th to gain input. In December, Governor introduced, budget was released, and we also met with department heads to review their budget requests. We looked at their current FY 2019 budget and also looked at the FY 2018 actual expenditures to look back as to what was accomplished, what you have in your budget, what are some of those one-time expenditures that can be eliminated, and also in the 2019 going forward. In January and February, we had preliminary estimates of revenue and expenditures that was presented to our district leadership team that Dr. Boone referenced. And that's where the leadership team came together and Ms. Tao facilitated the session where we looked at what were the major increases that was requested. And then we looked at how much revenue did we have. And then we took priorities as to what things will be submitted to Dr. Boone to conclude in her proposal budget, which was very successful. Also in January, February, we received the House and Senate versions of their budgets. And today we're at the point of presenting Dr. Boone's proposed educational plan to the board. We have scheduled a public hearing on March the 6th on the budget, and then also hopefully on March the 20th, the school board will adopt a proposed budget, which we then have to have the city council by April the 1st. We're also starting out first, just to give you what our current budget is for this year is $329.6 million, and it was based on a projected March ADM of 27,983 students. And this slide just shows you where the money goes. $244.4 million goes into instructional and instructional support. The amount that goes into administration, attendance, and health, pupil transportation, operation and maintenance, facilities, and technology. These are the state categories that we should be showing as to when we're presenting our budget or how to report to the state. The next few slides, I want to give a historical perspective or foundation or how we got to where we are for the proposal of the 2020 budgets. And it kind of like sets the foundation. Dr. Boone talked about some of the structural imbalances and the things that we have been able to accomplish over the years. So I just want to briefly show you some of those things through our enrollment projections from 2009 to 2020, what our funding priorities were in 2018 and 2019, which leads up to our funding priorities for 2020. On this slide is our enrollment projections. We are seeing our actual enrollment with the fall membership and the March ADM. And the March ADM is the enrollment that the state used to base our funding on. So if you look back into 2009, we had a March ADM of 31,639. And what's being projected for 2020 is 27,234. So between 2009 and 2020, projected student count of March ADM has decreased 4,315 students, so approximately 13.6%, a decline in enrollment. And we can see the decline, but it's beginning to level off a little bit. Okay. When we develop our 2018 budgets, one of the main priorities was the pay and comp study. We had conducted a pay and comp study. So phase one of that pay and comp study was we developed a 30-step scale to try to get rid of some of the compressions that we had, and we wanted to implement that scale. So what we did was we placed employees on that 30-step scale such that they did not lose any funding. And in some instances, the average or some people got a 2-step increase for the placement because of the increase that the scale had developed. And we had anticipated it would take 4 years to fully implement the scale. And these are some of the other priorities that that shows that what we did. But I mainly want to focus in on the salary, pay, and comp study and some of the other things we were doing, like restoring state-mandated position with the ITRTs, implementing the school health services, because the district about 4 or 5 years ago took on school nurses with the division where they had formerly been provided by the state health department and the city nurses, so they all came into our budget. So we were finalizing, make sure we right-size that, having the appropriate amount of staff and supplies for our nurses. And then we were also increasing our maintenance budget. 2019, our priorities again was continue with the pay and comp study. With that, we began our step movement. So for the current year, the beginning step increased to $44,000 for a teacher on the bachelor scale with no experience. And we also tweaked a little bit the salary scale at the beginning of the steps, where it's not quite 2 or 2.5% like most of the other steps are. And the average salary increase for this current year was 3.3% for all our employees. And then in 2020, we're continuing with phase 3, and I will talk more about phase 3 further in the presentation. But also, back up one more, I'm sorry. One thing that we also did in the current year budget was we started incentive funds for the hard-to-staff schools. We also funded behavioral intervention and support system with ISS monitors, where we had, for those schools that had a population of over 500 students, received a full-time monitor, and those less received part-time dollars to address those elementary schools. And you'll see as we go forward to 2020, we're continuing that phase-in with the monitors, and if you see the second bullet from the bottom, no, that's bus drivers, I'm sorry. But under continued funding to support behavior intervention and support programs, you'll see also later in the document where we are proposing to increase and add ISS monitors at the secondary level. So we started the baseline, and each year we are phasing in and continuing those efforts to improve instruction in all of our schools. What I'm going to go over next is the biennium budget. You know, the state approves a 2-year budget, and 2020 will be the second year. And this is what I think I shared with the board, so I'm going to go over this piece quickly. About a month ago, I shared with you that piece. Our enrollment, again, was down in the second year of the biennium, and they were including a 3% salary increase for all funded SOQ instruction and support position. And if you recall, I also shared with you that we have more position than what the state funds. So those positions that are above the state funding are fully funded through local dollars. Okay. In the compensation study supplement for 2020 in the biennium, the 3% will be effective July 1, and it was continued upon stable general fund revenue. Also, in December, the governor proposed amendment to what we just saw that was in part of the biennium. The House and Senate version came out, and the General Assembly adjourned on February the 24th. This budget is based on the governor's proposed budget, where he updated direct aid payments based on enrollment projection, program participation, technical updates, sales tax projection, and lottery fund projections. One thing in what he was proposing was to increase the add-on risk adjustment for those schools who are designated as being in poverty or who are at risk. And what was currently in the budget was the add-on percentage was 13%, and he proposed 16% to increase that. The impact, and that would be for the current fiscal year and upcoming 2020. The impact for the current year was only $132,000. On the supplement, increase in supplements piece, he recommended 2% above the 3% that was already in the biennium. And the criteria for that was over the biennium period, that division, in order to get these funding, that the division had to give 5% over the 2-year biennium. And it can be all the first year or the second year or a combination of both years. He also proposed changing the staffing requirements for our counselors. What you have on the screen here is showing the from column is what the current staffing ratios are, and the to column is what the governor was proposing. So for elementary school, he was proposing going from 500 per student to 375. Middle school, counselor, I'm sorry. 400 students to one counselor for middle school is going to 325, and for the high school, 350 going to 300. Here again, for 2020, I mentioned earlier he was proposing to take the at-risk percentage, but in the original budget was at 14%, but he was proposing to go to 16%. And he also proposed increasing the lottery per pupil dollar amount in 19 and 20. One thing that was included in the governor's budget was our VPI Plus program is federally funded, and that's due to sunset this fiscal year. So the governor was proposing to help sustain those divisions who were participating. He included in his budget $1.1 million for the VPI Plus program. And he said the first year there will be no required local match, but going forward, then there will be a phase-in of 10% per year for a local match until it reaches your composite index. I put this in red to note that due to the uncertainty of funding, no funding is included in this proposed budget for the VPI Plus fellow grant budget. And the reason being is in the Senate version, they were including money for VPI but requiring a 25% match. In the House version, they were proposing to eliminate it altogether. So we were going to wait until we get the General Assembly action, and which we have now, and waiting for the calc tool to see what eventually ended up in the General Assembly. So once we get the calc tool for that, we will be coming back with recommended adjustments on that piece. It's hard to see this, but if you have your PowerPoint in front of you, I was basically going to be showing you the differences between the House version, the Senate, and the governor's budget. I've talked about the compensation supplement piece. One difference in the House version, they were looking at a beginning date of January the 1st. The governor proposed July 1. When the school division gives salaries, typically they give it at the beginning of the fiscal year. And what he's proposing, that half of the year will go through before the state funding will kick in. Counselors, the comparison there, the Senate version is not as lucrative as the governor. The difference being under the governor's version, it appears we may need 9 counselors, and on the Senate version is 4. Keep in mind that what's in the budget is being presented is the governor's proposal, and once we get the General Assembly, we will have to make adjustments accordingly. The at-risk add-ons, I talked about that, and the VPI Plus I talked about. So bottom line, the difference between dollars impact to Norfolk Public Schools, if the Senate version came out and was approved, the district would receive $1.3 million less dollars than the governor's budget. And if the House version was approved, we will receive $1.1 million less than the governor's proposed budget. And here again, when we get the calc tool, we'll know exactly what that looks like. We also talked earlier about the city revenue, wherein the funding formula that Dr. Boone mentioned earlier takes effect with fiscal year 2020. Basically, it says that the city, we will share in certain revenue streams of 29.55% revenue sharing formula. They also set policy for giving us estimates, which is basically, it really helped us this year because they did, this month, have been giving us updates and estimate as they get final numbers in. They have been sharing with us and sharing that what our increases are. It also talks about truing up if the revenue comes in higher than anticipated or comes in less than anticipated. It has provision in there that we can negotiate and see how we're going to end up the division. And it also says that we will be revising the policy and looking at that. Federal funds are basically level funding, and other local funds are miscellaneous funds like certain tuition or fees or things of that nature is pretty stable in this current budget. So looking based on the projected enrollment of 27,235 March ADM, the proposed budget is $336.4 million, or $6.8 million higher than the current budget. If you go back up to the city regular appropriation, where it shows that in 2018 the actual was $117.4 million, that is what Dr. Boone was referencing, what our local contribution from the city was. And once they had the tax increase and we got the, I think, 2.72%, 2.4% increase, we received like a $5 million increase in our base appropriation from the city. So therefore, the increase, the 29.5% we get, will be in addition to our bases have been increased $5 million this year. So then sharing in the revenue streams, we'll get 29.55% of that. And this year, the latest projection says we should get $3 million from the city. So we also get crossing guards, where basically they put the funding in our budget, but then we turn around and pay them the bill for the crossing guards because they are employees of the city. This is just another snapshot of the chart that shows the breakdown where 58.8% revenue comes from the state. I can't read that amount from the city. 38.6% from the city, a little bit of local, a little bit of federal dollars. Oops. So it goes back to what does this budget supports. Here it supports phase 2 of our pay and comp study. I'll go into a little bit more detail later. It also includes a 4% salary increase in our health insurance premium to be shared by employer and employee. We are proposing to continue the salary incentives for hard-to-staff schools. This year we were doing teachers. Next year we are proposing to include teacher assistants. We're going to complete the restoration of the instruction technology resource teachers. I think it's one position that's being added this year, then we will reach the requirement of 27. We're going to continue the funding to support behavior intervention and support programs, which I mentioned earlier. We have 12 in-school monitors for our secondary schools. We have 8 positions in the budget for teacher assistants to provide support for our students with special needs. We have 2 positions for pre-K specialists to conduct preschool classroom observation. And we call this a state unfunded mandate. The state has passed regulations or rules wherein we have to provide observations for all of our pre-K classrooms. And I believe the observations are twice a year. And they have to observe, and they have to do a write-up and then follow up. They also have to provide professional development plans for the teacher and the teacher assistants. So in looking at this, we're figuring that we needed to add 2 positions to do that work in the operating budget. We complete the phase in of athletic trainers at the high school. And over the years, we've been adding one because of the change in the program at ODU. They've been phasing that out. So this will give each of our high schools an athletic trainer. This is the counselors we've been talking about in the governor's budget by changing the ratios to 9 positions. We're continuing to phase in converting part-time bus attendants to full-time to assist with transporting students with disabilities. Last year, we created 15 positions. We upgraded from part-time to full-time, and we're continuing that in the current year's budget. We are also implementing some recommendations from the Council of Great City Schools, reviewed our transportation department. We have 1 routing manager and 1 payroll clerk in the transportation department with over 200 and some positions, almost 300 positions, or 250 bus budgeted positions, who does the routing for everything. And what we have is just that 1 person. There is no one else to assist or help with the training, and it was just good business practice to have someone else there that you can understand the routing and to assist, and also will cut down on so much of the overtime that 1 person is trying to do on both the payroll side and the routing manager. In order to accomplish this, we also recommending to reduce bus drivers' positions. Currently, we have approximately 250, but as you know, we share with you that it's still hard to fill those positions, and at any given day, we could have 40-some vacant positions. So we're going to eliminate some of those vacant positions, take those dollars, and put it back into transportation to create the upgrade of the bus attendants and to include the routing manager and the payroll clerk. So those are cost neutral to the budget. We also adding a custodian for the new Camp Allen. When phase 2 open, it will be a larger building, and based on the staffing size, they will be entitled to another custodian. We also increasing the teacher allocation from $50 to $100 this year, next year rather. Currently, in the current budget, we increased their supply allocations by, I think it was 10%. For the current school year. So we're still looking at seeing how we can right size and get more funding down at the school level.
And the supply, the 10% increase is the money that goes directly to the school for the principal to manage. These supply allocations go directly to the teachers.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the phase 3 of the pay and comp study. We're still tweaking the beginning steps of our pay and comp scales, our new 30-step scales. So what we're proposing is to increase the beginning scale by 0.5%. And then for steps 2 to 4, we're increasing that by 0.25%. When we do that, the beginning teacher salary will go up from $44,000 to $44,200, and it will provide all employees with a step increase. The average,
Yeah, we'll be done in just a minute.
the average salary increase by doing the step increase and the adjustment there will be an average of 3.1% salary increase for the employees. The health insurance and premium is going up 4%. We currently have like 3 plans and 4 tiers. We have employee only, employee plus spouse, employee plus minors or children, and employees and families. What we did here was to give you 2 examples. We chose teacher salaries, 2 teacher positions, and we were giving you an example of what that increase will look like. So for the first example is a teacher who in 2018 was at step 2. When they moved to the current year and got their salary increase, it was 2.4%. And what we're proposing for next year, they will receive 2.8%. And to the right will show you their pay increase for each pay period. What we use, their actual deductions down here, with the exception of the footnote, those things we excluded out of there because it was hard to calculate. We look at the health insurance line. Based on the plan that this employee has chosen, employee only with the HSA 1500 plan, If you look at 2019, her health insurance premium was $38 that she had to pay, he or she. Proposal for 2020 with a 4% increase, that health insurance premium will go to $40 for an increase of $2 compared to her salary increase of $56.43. So that's just giving you a snapshot, because sometimes people will think that a 4% increase is based on the salary, but it's not. It's based on the actual plan. So the increase is actually smaller than the other way.
We thought it was important to include this because often we hear, well, if the average is a 3.1% increase and my health insurance is going up 4%, then I'm at a 0.9% negative. And so we did this last year for the board, and we thought it was important to do it in this initial presentation this year to give an example of what that impact would look like on a person's salary. So this person would still recognize, if barring no other changes or whatever else in the health insurance, as Ms. Ingram indicated, $54.43 per pay period additional, based on the 2.8%. And you remember, the 3.1% is average, and so based on where this person is in terms of the scale, the average would be 2.8%.
The second example, teacher 2, in 2018 was at step 10. 2019 went to 11. They receive a 3.9% salary increase, and with the proposal for 2020 will receive a 3.5% salary increase. So their per period increase is $83.47. Again, go down to the health insurance. This employee has the POS 1000, employee plus family, and comparing 2019 to 2020, her insurance will increase from $176 to $183, or a $7 increase in premium, wherein her salary increase will be $83.47. So this is showing you, based on where you are on the scale, what the individual salary increase would be and what their chosen health insurance rate, what their increase should look like. Under staffing changes, we summarize the staffing changes. We have declining enrollment, like we've shared with you. So we can eliminate, based on projection, 30 positions. Some of those positions are currently vacant, and they will all be absorbed through normal attrition. As Dr. Boone has shared in the 2x2, she's not asking to implement the RIF policy. We believe with 30 positions, everyone will have a position, plus with the turnover, we will be able to absorb it. We are proposing to reduce 2 VPI classes for 2 teachers and 2 paras. The state funding is decreased, and actually our enrollment a little bit had decreased as well. So in looking at staffing of 18 to 1, we feel like we can reduce that and still serve students. We were looking at the capacity, and we still have some classes that are still not full currently. And also what is changing with VPI Plus, no, I'm sorry, that's VPI Plus and this is VPI. I'm not going to go there, sorry. This is VPI. So with the reduction in the student and the participation, we feel like we can reduce the 2 classes. There are 2 central office administration positions that can be eliminated.
Oh, yeah, and I realized when I just looked at this page, I skipped that sentence in my prepared remarks. That includes the digital learning administrator and the NEF executive director's position. So with the elimination of those 2 positions, we are reducing central office by 2.
Support position due to the closing of the elementary school, with the board's vote last week to close Popular Halls and to move towards a 3-8 at Lake Taylor Middle School. We can save on 2 support position. The instructional position should be following the students. Staff will be looking at the other positions there and determining the impact of those, because you still have the administrative position at the schoolhouse level. So they'll be looking at that and what the recommendation will be from that. Transportation staffing changes, we talked about the 15 bus attendants being converted, the routing manager and the payroll clerk, and the elimination of 14 bus driver positions. The two preschool specialist positions that we talked about as well, the custodian, we only need one ITRT to get to the requirement of 27 per 1,000 students. 8 special ed teach position for those to support the students with special needs, the 9 counselors, the athletic trainer, the in-school suspension monitors, and the mailroom clerk, where we're proposing to go from part-time to full-time. For net change to the budget is 0, so it's elimination of 52 positions and the addition of 52 positions. This is balancing the budget. How do we get to the revenue? The salary increase portion is $6.8 million. The employee benefit increase is $1.7 million for health insurance, unemployment, and those types of benefits.
And that's the employer, that's the NPS portion.
Right. Increase in part-time hourly rates for teachers and teacher assistants and stipends for hard to fill is $1.2 million. In looking at some of the imbalances, we had, I think, increased summer school teacher rate, but the part-time teacher hourly rate had not been increased, so that is being increased to take care of some of that structural imbalance. Again, to increase the supply teacher allocation from $50 to $100 is $100,000. To expand dual enrollment for 2 more math classes is approximately $100,000. To increase non-discretionary accounts like utilities, insurance, and tuition payments is $1 million. And the staffing changes, the increase is $2 million, the decreases is $2.9 million. We also balanced through attrition savings and elimination of one-time costs. When we develop the budget, we look at who is currently on staff now and what are those attrition savings. So we base the base budget on current staff plus average for any vacant position. So when we do that, there is savings. So we take that into account when we build the budget. And we also eliminate any of those one-time requests from departments that they don't need the second year. So that totals $3.2 million. So our increases were 12.6 million. 12.9, I'm sorry, thank you. And the decrease is 6.1 for a net increase of 6.8 million. And if you recall when we were talking about revenue, we talked about we got a 6.8% increase in revenue for the budget. So we are balanced with 6.8 additional revenue and a net increase of 6.8 in expenditures.
And a 2.1% increase in the overall budget.
This is a snapshot basically by expenditure-wise between salaries, benefits, and other costs. If you look at our salaries and our employee benefits, that is about 85% of our total budget is with our staff. And then you have the other 14.8% or so is in other costs to operate the division. Next. And this is by the major state categories. Again, if you look at instructional support, 74% of our budget goes into instruction, which is our focus to get the funding at the school level to help our children. So bottom line, the superintendent's proposed budget for is based on the governor's amendment to the biennium budget, with a projected March ADM of 27,234 students, is $336,398,289. Comparing the superintendent's proposed budget to our current school board approved budget is when we round up 6.8 million, which is, like Dr. Boone said, 2.1% increase over the current budget. Adjustments that should be coming after the General Assembly action. Currently, we do not have the state we call it a calc tool. They call it a template. wherein you can go in by division and determine based on your enrollment projection the state funding that the district will be receiving. So we have not received we do not have access to the calc tool as of today, but looking at information from the legislative liaison and what we've seen in the paper, there are some things that we can anticipate changing. For instance, the 2% salary increase will become effective September 1 versus what we have in the governor's budget of July 1. So there's a difference of 3 months there, a salary increase, so there will be adjustment there. Only on the state revenue side, okay? Because we still will be giving our salary increases July 1, but the state funding will not kick in until September, which basically your 12 and 11-month people, state doesn't provide any funding for, not the full year anyway. It's some proration of that. In reading the literature as well, it looks like the counselors or the governors, I shared with you what the ratio was. It appears that what came out of the General Assembly is less than the governor, closer to the Senate version. So that would mean versus 9 counselors could be 4 or something less, depending on what we actually see in the verbiage. And the VPI plus funding, it talks about having VPI plus funding, which was the federal grant, but it also talks about requiring a 40% match. So we don't know what that looks like yet. So those are some of the things we'll be looking at. And I believe also what was passed was increasing the security grant, equipment grant, upping that per district as well. So that should be changed as well. So here again, once we have access to the calc tool, hopefully we'll get it prior to the next meeting where we can then bring you updates based on what we're getting from the General Assembly. So the next steps, March the 6th, there's a school board work session and public hearing. There's a tentatively scheduled school board work session on March the 13th for school board discussions of the proposed budget, with on March the 20th, a work session, and at the regular meeting, approval, hopefully, of the budget from the school board, which will give us time to prep it, because by state law, we have to have it to the city by April 1st. And then these are tentative next steps. We've gotten information that the city will be holding a public hearing on their budget on April the 10th, their proposed operating and CIP budget. That on May 14th, the plan is to adopt the City of Norfolk annual appropriation ordinances for the operating budget and CIP. And then in May or June, early June, the school board will come back and do the final adoption of its budget. Then we will have it available for department heads to spend on July 1. We get it allocated to the schools. So go ahead, you can wrap up.
Thank Ms. Ingram. This completes our presentation of the major categories and everything of the budget. Certainly, we were hoping that the General Assembly would finish before the 24th so that we would have visibility of what it actually looks like. We don't know. But as soon as that calc tool is available for the district's use, we will go in and look at the impact on what was finally approved by the General Assembly and provide those updates. I can't see any reason why we shouldn't have it unless the state is really dragging its feet, but we will let the board know in advance if we don't have it. If we do have it, then we will update you on everything that we know relative to any adjustments based on the General Assembly approved budget.
Okay, and you have the PowerPoint there, but afterwards, Ms. Tao will have a version of the budget book that gives you a lot more detail after the work session, so you can have it. And it will also be posted tomorrow.
Do we have a location yet for the March 6th public hearing?
Northview High School.
Northam High School, okay.
So we would be doing the budget work session for the board at Northview High School, and then would continue for the public hearing on the budget, same location.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna open the floor to board discussion on the proposal. Ms. Campson, Ms. Martin,
Thank you, Dr. Finn and Dr. Ingram. It was very concise. I appreciate it. When we met in our 2x2, I talked to Dr. Boone about one of the priorities that I had on the list that I gave him in the fall, which was to restore the reading and math specialist positions at the elementary level. And she had looked over it already and actually was able to give me the cost of that, which was $840,000 for those 12 positions, which is a lot of money. However, I feel those positions are critical in looking at our pretty flat reading and math scores. I have some great concerns about it, and so I thought about that maybe what I could ask for, realizing that it's a lot of money, is to phase it in the way we phased in some of the other positions. You know, if we did it over 2 years, that would cut that money in half to $420,000. And I urged the superintendent to look into the possibility of doing that. It's that important because we have to focus on our academic excellence, and we obviously need to have those positions returned and restored to do that. These are not new positions. These are positions that were in the district for a very long time. I certainly know reading specialist was, because I was one for a very long time. And the math ones came in right as we were getting into all the new testing back at the turn of the century, which makes me sound like I'm really old saying turn of the century. And they were, in fact, the math positions were put in as we were in the midst of trying to turn our district around in the year 2000, I think, 2001, sometime in there. The principals were begging for those positions, and they made a huge impact in getting our math competency up so much higher. So that would be my big continued concern, is that I'd like to see us make some action in that direction. It doesn't have to be all of them next year, because I understand money's tight, but so I'd like to ask for it to be over the next 2 years.
Certainly, and I should have said earlier, we'll take notes on questions and things that the board has, and we can try to cost those out, because we knew that had been a focus as it related to the math specialists. We already had the cost of those. And the other thing we also clarified during the 2x2 with Ms. Campson was that we had not eliminated the teacher math and reading specialists that were in schools supported by Title I. So they, it had been, I think, a district-provided one, as well as additionally for school, built it into their Title I budgets. And so with declining enrollment, that hits the school level Title I budget because they get fewer dollars per student. But we have been able to maintain most of those, and so these are in addition to. We also again share, which was known, but again, just for that historical perspective of linking through this transition, that the district had requested from the city a $5 million one-time appropriation for about 80 math and reading specialists, but it did not have a continuing funding focus, support for it. And so that was one of those major structural imbalances that I inherited in my first budget. Arrived in December 15 and presented a budget in March of 16, and that was one of the first things that we had to begin to make some adjustments, because we were going to have to either lay off some other folks that were critical operational pieces, or to maintain that, or we had to do some right sizing around that. And so over a couple of years we did some right sizing based on some of our enrollment. Every elementary school has access to at least a half.
I have the list here.
Yeah,
I'll look
we
at
had
it.
to.
Except for ADL. I didn't see ADL on there. ADL, am I saying that right? Academy, whatever.
I would have
Lakewood.
to look. Right. I would have to look into.
I didn't. That one. I did not notice that one on there. Certainly, I feel that those should be general budget positions anyway. That everyone should have one general budget. I know we only have 3 elementary schools that are not Title I, but I think, because what I feel is that the Title I money should be there for a second reading specialist in all of our unaccredited Title I schools. And as the Title I budget, I'm sure probably are already looking at, working on that application, I would like that to be put on there as a priority on that application also. I want to see our children all reading on grade level. It is absolutely essential. To me, it's the most important work we're doing right now is making sure that we can get our children to grade level in reading and math. So that's my hope, and as I said, that's why, realizing it was expensive to do it over 2 years and put them based on our assessment data where they're needed the most. You know, we can always say, well, this school is great, it's got 80% of its kids are passing the reading test, maybe it has 90%, but what if it was your personal child that was in the 10% or the 20% that wasn't proficient? Then that seems like a lot all of a sudden, doesn't it? You know, it's great to be at 80%, it's great to be at 90%, I've been at 90%, but always then had to say, yay, celebrate 90%, but now can I have the list of the 10 children who didn't make it? So we can see what we can do for them next year. And so that, to me, should be the first priority that we start with any budget, is that we're ensuring that we have those people in. I know that in Virginia Beach, where they had 6 unaccredited schools a few years ago, the superintendent asked those principals, and most of them are former Norfolk principals, what do they need? What do you need to get your school accredited this year? And every one of them said, we need a second reading specialist. I'm sure they probably used their title money for it, because I'm sure they're all title schools. And they were all 6 accredited at the end of the next year, and they maintained that accreditation this past year. And so I think that we can see the results. I've seen it myself, and there's nothing more important to me to be in this budget than the beginning of the restoration of those positions. And I appreciate the fact that ahead of time, Dr. Boone, you talked it over with your senior staff and were able to price it out for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Martin?
I just want to talk about chronic absenteeism. I noticed in the budget that you're increasing the in-school suspension monitors, which is wonderful. But I don't see anything about the truancy officers, or are we increasing, I don't know, is that their official title? I don't know what they're officially called. Truancy officers? Attendance technicians. Or what kind of supports that you're doing to aid them, since chronic absenteeism does count for accreditation?
Our initial approach to some of the attendance piece, as we shared during the mid-year retreat in January, is to look at what are the things that we can control as a district that are contributing to attendance issues. Suspension being one of those. So certainly the message is not to suspend. And there are offenses that require consequences, but not all of those offenses require consequences that result in out-of-school suspension. And so we felt, in conversations with principals and others, to have another option for how we address suspension of minor infractions that require consequences rather than out of school. We should begin to see a bump. Basically, we shared a data example with the board when we looked at that, and that's why we thought it was very important to get those now at the secondary level, since we had done the elementary level this year. Once we have addressed some of that, we may find that the workload of the attendance techs then is reduced, because those students who might have had 10 out-of-school days may end up with 8 in-school days and never flag 8 in-school suspension days, and they never flag for the attendance technicians, because they're in school. And so that's how we want to begin monitoring what that looks like.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. And another thing about the changes with the in-school suspension, which again, I'm really happy to hear, that we're able to take steps in the right direction. But I just would encourage some professional development on how these changes impact classroom management. Thank you.
Ms. Basine?
So along the lines of the attendance technicians, I had a similar request or question around whether we needed additional technicians. And one based on your response, I was wondering, have you noticed, since we've added in-school suspension monitors, that the attendance technicians that are covering those schools, that their load is reduced? Because that was the next question I was going to ask, is how can we reduce the number of schools they have to cover? And you partially stated that the ISS monitors might do that, might accomplish that, but are we seeing that already, or?
I would have to get with Dr. Harold Lands and look at what the caseload and the implementation has looked like for the attendance text based on the implementation of the full-time ISS monitor at elementary schools that had 500-plus students. I don't know if we've looked at those data yet, but we will certainly see what we can find out by the next.
Okay.
Just a follow-up to that. Are the absentee technicians, are they full-time or part-time?
Those are full-time
They're
positions.
full-time positions. Okay.
Hold on a second. Wait a minute.
Attendance
attendance?
tech.
Attendance technicians, sorry.
They're full-time?
Whatever they're called.
Attendance techs are full-time positions.
But they might cover more than one. They cover the feeder, right?
They,
Like
s-
the-
excuse me, Dr. Harold Lands, would you share with us?
They
Can you
do
pass her the mic?
cover full, they're full-time positions, and they cover multiple schools, but we have 6 full-time positions to cover the entire district, basically. So they do cover multiple schools, but they are definitely full-time position. Years ago, we used to have some part-time positions.
I have a follow-up question with you on that, because I may have received some misinformation.
Yes,
And I just
ma'am.
want to make sure that I am appropriately informed on that. I'm
Yeah,
thinking
we-
full-time FTE.
We have some part-time ISS monitors.
No.
Any school that was less than 500 students received dollars. Elementary schools received dollars for them to hire part-time. And those were our much smaller schools, and that was the model that we were able to put into place last year, and we are continuing that. And then the 12 full-time go for those schools, bringing the secondary schools on that.
No, I'm specifically asking about attendance technicians and the ones that are shared between schools. I just met someone who said that she's part-time and she's rounds between 8 different schools. So I just want to make sure that maybe we're thinking of a different position, but the way that it was termed to me was attendance technician.
Well, certainly, if you can find the exact position and share that with me, I'll follow up with Dr. Harold Lands, but she's confirming that there are 6 full-time attendance techs that serve the entire district.
All right, 6 full. And are those out of the operational budget, or are they out of a different pool of money? Operating. Okay,
Operating.
she's spoken. Got it, yes.
Thank you.
No, yeah. Okay, Ms. Basine, yeah.
And Dr. Boone, are you seeing, I know if you're seeing a need, but if you could put your ideal budget forward, would you include testing coordinators at all of the high schools as part of that? Or are you feeling that there is not as much of a need?
There certainly is a need for the support, and we've done some of that with the flexibility that the state gave us with the ITRTs, that they can serve some of the testing function. And so the Assessment, Research, and Accountability Department has structured in some of that way. I could certainly see a testing coordinator perhaps has another role in addition to that. Not all testing is year-long. If we were a 4x4 school district where we did state testing in the fall in massive numbers of the 4 core content of students who are enrolled, and then we had to do that in the spring, I might say different for that. But because we have year-long courses and we administer SOL tests in the spring, that's one piece. Any fall administration of SOL testing, for those who need the opportunity to try it for retakes, expedited retakes. And so the numbers of those tend to be a lot smaller than when you have the full-scale testing that begins in March with writing and then continues with the other 3 content in the spring. Some support, yes, but I don't see them as being dedicated positions.
Okay. I have a couple more. I have provided a list back in early February, so I'm just, you hit several of my priorities. So the other ones are, you mentioned when we made the decision, or when we were talking about the Lake Taylor 3-8 and the start times, part of the recommendation was to consider cooperative strategies for program management. I think, I mean, at least that we might want to consider that for the program management piece of the
Educational planning.
of the educational planning work. Is that included, reflected in the operating budget, or is that something that
It is.
we would have to consider?
We would have to do a contract amendment with them
Okay.
for that extra scope of work and what that would look like. But that would be finishing out primarily this school year for implementation for the fall.
Okay.
So that would be something we would absorb mostly through this school year, a little bit at the beginning of the year. Cooperative strategies, funding for the next fiscal year is included in the budget.
Okay. And then last year, we talked about a special education audit, and it was, at the time, believed that it could be included as part of the operating budget. Is that still something
Yes.
that you foresee? Okay.
Yes.
All right. And I feel like I ask this question every year, but I feel like I have to advocate because I do feel strongly about GRTs in every school building, especially to help identify and support students in our underserved schools and high schools. At the secondary level too, I do, of course, I hear a lot about additional supports being needed there, especially from a social and emotional standpoint. So that's something that I would like to know the costs around that. And I know I've learned over the years, if this is something we want to add, what are we taking away in other areas? And I'll think about that. But I would at least, like to know what, the same as you did with the math specialist, what that might look like from a cost perspective.
How many of those do we have? How short are we of those? Are we sharing them? Or
I don't know. I have to go back and pull the assignment. Last year, this time, I could tell you. I just don't recall.
It does
the
make a
date of the
difference
day.
in the quality of they get. Okay.
Okay. Ms. Campson?
All right, the next question has a little bit of a tag on Ms. Bassine's. So for the Lake Taylor combined 3 to 8 school next year, I just didn't see it in here. And as I was going through the last 3, I saw, the phasing in of STEM, Lakewood Academy for
ADL.
ADL. I don't know why I can't get that. So I just wondered, will that now will it appear here starting with next year with the?
Different from what happened with ADL and Southside STEM, each of 3 years, those schools grew into their full
Yes, they did.
number of years.
You're right, okay.
This
Okay.
is a movement, and so it would already be a 3-8.
But they'll move down in 2 years probably.
Well, again,
And then we-
in a couple of years, we anticipate that the enrollment would allow the K-2 from Fair Lawn to be absorbed in the building, and then by then, we would have hopefully accomplished all of the facility adjustments that were needed to accomplish that. But for right now, for this upcoming fiscal year, there's no phase in, so there's no staffing changes related to that. And because, as I've said before, we are not trying to consolidate a couple schools with the same grade configuration, that the staffing flows with the enrollment of the schools.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jordan?
Thank you. First, like to compliment Dr. Boone and your team on the work that you've done thus far. I appreciate the historical timeline in terms of the progress that's been made. I don't know if we're doing wish lists now or what we're doing, but specific to some of the recommendations that we have here, the reduction in the VPI classes, the 2 teachers and 2 paraprofessionals as part of our staffing change strategies associated with balancing the budget. I shared, in the 2x2 about my concern about that. I think that if we're having challenges on the enrollment side, that I think we need to explore, marketing, recruitment, other things that we need to do. I just think for our city and the demographics that we have in terms of the number of students that are in that age range, that we still have a jewel that we need to make sure that people are aware of. So I just want to offer at this point my concern about that. We didn't have much in here that I'll see in the detailed budget, but we spent a lot of effort over the last few years looking at our specialty programs and expansion. And we talked about both trying to make sure that we have equity at the high school and in some respects at the middle school level, and also the possibility of expanding some of the programs where we have demand. So I don't want to go into any specifics, but I'll be looking as I go through the detailed budget whether or not we're making progress in that direction, especially as we looked at the equity challenges at the high school level, and whether or not we are seeing continuing demand with the IB and some of the other specialty programs that we have. I do have a question. Can you re-describe again your intentions around the digital learning administrator?
Originally, as we've started looking at what are innovative ways to deliver content and teaching and learning to our students and leverage our strong technology background, that our goal was to have someone dedicated to an expansion and enhancement of that. When we did the position upgrade earlier this year, we incorporated some of those responsibilities into the Senior Director of Instructional Technology. And so based on the work that's already underway with that, as well as I've shared with the board, we're working with a potential outside person. We're not ready to bring it prime time yet, because we need to iron out some additional details as to what that platform and everything will look like. But we believe we can accomplish a lot of what's going on through that work and the digital learning. The Senior Director of IT is part of those conversations now, and how we drive that, and the strong work that Dr. Cataldo is doing under Ms. Chavis's leadership and others within academic affairs is how we're blending it all together.
A couple other things quickly. One, regarding the different reports that you may be providing to board members, I'd like to know if everybody can get copies of those. I'd like to understand more about the reading and math specialists and other items.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, there wasn't a report. It was simply just as Ms. Basine and Ms. Campson both had sent some things in. But we will include in any updated documentation the data around our reading and math specialists. And as I said, we just happen to calculate the cost for 7 reading specialists, 5 math specialists, roughly $840,000.
Yeah. And
roughly, with benefits.
And just last thing for now, I was at a city council meeting last night, and one of the items on the agenda was a text amendment associated with the St. Paul's work. Mm-hmm. And in their resolution, they identified that Tidewater Park was going to be upgraded to be the school of record for the area, that Ruffner was going to be upgraded, that Booker T was going to be a new school.
Used to be.
Yeah, all of which I might be supportive of.
A little surprise in there.
Yeah, but the key thing in that St. Paul's area, there are 2,500 school-age children in that area. So almost 1 out of every 8, 1 out of every 9 potential students in all of Norfolk Public Schools are in that area. And I don't think we are giving sufficient attention to that. And so I would ask, as part of our budget process, especially with the fact that that area serves several of our most challenged schools, that we can somehow begin to reflect, perhaps in this budget, how we're going to address these changes. I know we've talked about it for some time. We saw an article in the paper about families in Tidewater Gardens being moved. We talked about attendance techs, but we also know what the data tells us about schools that are in transition and the trauma that's associated with constant moves. So I think that is a huge, significant impact on our division, and I'd like for us to have more discussion about it moving forward.
Let me just briefly bring you up to speed to what I do know. I have not been part of any conversations that put a stake in the ground, anything other than around Booker T is the CTE high school. That's the only conversation. The elementary school and how Ruffner would serve that area, the city has been waiting for us to give them some direction, and I said I needed better direction from the process. I'm fully at the table in this work. And as a matter of fact, there will be members of the district leadership team that will be serving on various work groups going forward associated with the aspects of the work. For example, as you talk about what's happening with the students, one of the things we did early on in this process is to flag addresses so that as families move, we would have an idea as to whether or not students are staying within the district, if so, where they moving to, because we're going to have to address the impact of what's going on there, as well as any students who leave the district, because if they leave the city, then we have an enrollment impact. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the first things that we've been doing in terms of monitoring what goes on. We're at the table with some of the conversations. I serve on the St. Paul's Advisory Group. So I'm in those meetings, and when we talk about some of the work with People First, Dr. Birdsong has been at the table with me with some of the proposals around United for Children and how they will support students who currently reside in the area and could be moving out of the area. So we've been at the table in offering thoughts of how we begin to support those families. United for Children also, United Way, received a grant in conjunction with Reverend Turpin, and I know Ms. Chavis and Dr. Gray, Dr. Birdsong and others have been part of that. The idea is reading support using a variety of ODU interns that's been funded by the Hampton Roads Community Foundation, with the goal of a system of support as those students leave the schools. One, shoring up their academic strengths before they leave, and two, what would be a system of support after they leave. So we've been part of those conversations around how do we transition. It's also important that we've kept our schools, our principals who've been at the table in a variety of conversations, and faculty up to date so that they can best support and understand what's going on. We know, as I reported to the board last time, I think last week, that the city is a finalist for the CNI grant. And as a result of funding for that would determine if the city is funded, what would be some potential timelines for things kicking off. And so we're looking to support as much as we can. We've even, we've continued with our trauma-informed care because these issues constantly come up there, and I'm glad that we had that in place in advance of some project timelines being associated with the St. Paul's transformation. But at the end of the day, we're staying closely involved until I have a better idea of exactly when the trigger is going to be pulled. I'm not at a place to come back with a series of recommendations for the board. At some point, when you look at phase 1 of Tidewater Gardens, which is roughly 187 units or so, that will have a significant impact depending on where the families move to and when they move on the enrollment at all 4 of the schools you mentioned, PB Young, Tidewater Park, Ruffner, and Booker T. as they are dedicated attendance zones. I anticipate being able to keep the board abreast of that going forward in terms of the timelines, because the other piece of that is what will be any potential stress on our elementary schools, other elementary schools that are pretty much at capacity. So that's why we thought it was important to begin monitoring exactly where families are moving. Some of our conversations with the city and through this work is to build that right type of information sharing, so that, again, once we know that a family has received notice, we can put in the school-based systems of support through the principals, the teachers, the guidance counselors, and others. We also hope to make sure to be able to streamline the enrollment process, that if they are moving during the school year, that we can make sure that they are ready to move in. Once we have notice from the family and or the NRHA that the family is moving, then we can help streamline and make that re-enrollment process as painless as possible. So those are some of the things we're doing behind the scene in support of our students in schools.
Okay. Ms. Smith?
Just a comment. Being that this is my first time going through this budget process, I too want to thank you all for a very concise, easy to understand product. Even crosswalking from some things to another, it's easy to see how the information flows. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I do mine and then we go to yours? Okay, thank you. All right, yeah, I would agree. Thank you, Dr. Boone, that the 2x2s were very helpful, and the information, especially comparing year after year what we have been able to build back into the budget after the division was forced to make so many cuts due to decreases in state funding has been helpful. And I know this, we're trying to build back to that point, and it's difficult to do so with the dollars that we have, but I do appreciate all the efforts that you and the administration has made, especially with eliminating the one-time funding items. And I do take to heart when you say this isn't the perfect budget with everything that you would want, but I just want to reiterate some items that I did bring up in the 2x2 and support some of the items that have already been addressed. If I were to have an item that would fall as my number one priority for budget, it would definitely be the math and reading specialists. And Ms. Campson articulated that point very well, and I would just say I support that. The other item that I would like to bring up that's a new item is how we are offering music within our buildings. A while ago, Ms. Roby did a presentation to the board of how music education impacts academic performance. And I know that in recent times, especially with the drop in enrollment, we've had to do some realignment. But I do feel strongly that having an individual in a school building, and I'm not sure if it's elementary or middle, that get some water. I feel really strongly about what music does and the impact that it has on the lives of our students. And then going back to Mr. Jordan's point about building our specialty programs, if we have music instructors that are with a building every day of the week, they can build relationships with the students, and they can also identify the talented as well as the gifted. Okay, we used to have gifted and talented within Norfolk Public Schools. So I would say if it's one position, two positions, just to get to the point where we can decrease the amount of schools that some of our music teachers are sharing, I would like to see what we can do to bring that into the budget. And I'm certainly willing to say if we can maybe add one this year and another next year, I would accept that. But that's where I would like to see us build a little bit more in the budget.
Do any of our music teachers do more than 2 schools now?
I'm not sure. I know that there are a few that do
I
too.
will commit to providing what the music teachers by school looks like.
Okay. So I do feel strongly about that. The attendance technicians has been brought up, and I'll just say that if that is going to be a big part of our school accreditation, which rightfully so, we want kids in school so that they can learn and be a part of the accessing the curriculum. I do look forward as we go on with the next school year to see how the in-school suspension personnel will help to add and take these items off of their plate. I'd like to talk a little bit about the preschool situation, which we had a good discussion in our 2x2 about. It bothers me that the state or the grant that we receive is based on kindergarten enrollment, whereas the grant that is serving the children is very specific to the type of children that it serves. And there is no correlation between that. And it bothers me that we are having to eliminate 2 classes, which is 36 students, and bring on 2 specialists to do observations. It is an unfunded mandate. And Norfolk, as clearly articulated in the Poverty Reduction Commission, said that preschool is one of the most important ways that we can help to reduce poverty because we get kids on the right track earlier than when they start kindergarten. And so I know that the board took a very bold step and a great step in going forward with your proposal with the mixed income preschool. So I would like to know, Dr. Boone, is there anything in this budget coming up that might further expand the mixed income preschool model so that we might be able to offer these classes and bring in some of these students by local dollars that come from mixed income classes?
There's no proposal to do any expansion of pre-K in the budget as presented today. Number of reasons. One, the mixed income, it was existed as a pilot, and we don't think we're at a point now where we're ready to expand, because we end up with some of the same challenges with filling the mixed income classes that we do the VPI and the VPI plus classes, and it has to do with where the classes are located.
Okay.
And so, at this point, expansion wasn't on our radar screen. Well, wasn't part of my proposal.
Okay.
You know, we were somewhat excited. I think I shared with the board during governor's training that if the VPI plus with a held harmless of no local match came on board for this school year, as the governor was proposing, I thought that that was something that we would want to be able to see what number of classrooms we would want to preserve, because our infrastructure is there. We last year upgraded all of the classroom furniture and everything. That infrastructure was in place. However, as Ms. Ingram and Ms. Toa have been talking, if the proposal out of the General Assembly talks about a 40% match, I don't know how we can afford a 40% match. Having 1 year of being held harmless and figuring out then how we would build into 10% local match the next year until we got to our composite index, which is it 0.31 or 0.27? 0.29. See, I was in that range. 0.29. Then roughly, 29% of the cost is what we would have to come up with. But having to go from basically zero funding as local funding as relates to the VPI plus, other than how we address the match piece, and having to come up with 40% of the cost of that, that's pretty expensive. Last year we used the figure of the 6 classrooms that were being reduced were roughly $600,000. Roughly $100,000. A teacher and a teacher assistant in each classroom, so it costs us about $100,000 per classroom. So for every classroom we would want to bring on board, we would have at a minimum $40,000 that we would have to use to bring on those classrooms. And so certainly I'll be prepared to discuss this a little bit more next week once we've seen the state's calculation tool and what the actual language is. I couldn't agree more. I've been very vocal at the state level with superintendents and others around the unfunded mandate piece, the preschool observations. 110% on board with quality. As you all have seen in some of the superintendent's reports and others, we have teachers that have already met that quality rating of 5. We have folks from around the state that have been visiting our classrooms to look at the practices that are going on there. So we have some great things that's going on. So I'm not opposed to accountability, but in districts like Norfolk that have large numbers of classes, this is a huge piece. The 2 positions in the operating budget only represent half of what we need to do these observations across all of our classrooms, because the other 2 we're building into our federal grants, Title I for support. So we feel it's going to take 4. I presented this information to the state. I will certainly include that in information for the board next week, what I've sent off to the state superintendent, to folks who are part of that early learning commission, and others around this work, and Virginia Association of School Superintendents. Like I said, I don't disagree, but I do struggle with available seats, even when we provide transportation for the 4-year-olds. And I understand a parent's desire to have the classrooms, those classrooms that are available closest to their home. But when we can't do that, and we still have options available, and parents are not accepting of those options, then I'm hard pressed to say to the board, we need to expand when we still have space.
Of the current mixed income classes, there's still
there's space there, and there's space in our VPI and VPI plus.
Okay. Well then, okay. All right, thank you for that.
But I certainly will provide additional information once we see what the state's language is. The enrollment, like I said, what I was just saying earlier, there are a number of things. Because the state has, and we have a 15% set aside of local option of where we can go outside of the boundaries of the state's income requirement. And so we do that. The problem becomes somewhat of parents who want students in a certain location, and that's closer, but yet we may have spaces available in both of our pre-K centers, Willoughby and Berkeley-Compostela. And Berkeley-Compostela, with phenomenal programming, still has available spaces. Parents are opting not to go there. And so now that we have the transportation for the 4-year-olds, that reduces a burden that potentially on parents. So, there are any number of things that are there. The income requirements push us into the place where Head Start and VPI classrooms are pretty much looking at the same families. So when we're recruiting, a family, and rightfully so, will look for the program that best meets their family's needs. So if Head Start may be closer to where they would want a child to be, they opt for the Head Start program over the NPS program. And so these are these standards that are put in when you have such strict income requirements. And yet, as we did with the mixed income classrooms, we looked at those folks that fell in that band just above the cutoff. So, we have the, 200% poverty is the lowest level. And then we took it to the next range, what we presented to the board last spring. And so those were the families that were invited into the mixed income, that the first right for them, along with families who fell outside of all of the income guidelines. And so that's how we did it. But we still have challenges on excellent and quality programs and spaces that are available in the city, and parents who won't opt for those. And I think it gets back to some of what Mr. Jordan was saying. How are we marketing programs? How are we engaging parents? Because we've heard from parents, once they've finally gotten over the whatever, I shouldn't go there, they're extremely pleased with the programs, and they become great ambassadors. Because we have these mixed income programs this year, we probably have a different voice to help us in the recruitment with parents who are pleased, particularly those who are in some of the center-based classrooms.
I
Because our center-based for the mixed income are at Norfolk Technical Center and Berkeley Campus Delta.
I agree.
So were there, it's the way you did that with mixed income, did you put aside a certain number of children in each of those was it 6 classes?
There were 3 classes. We were trying to pretty much do a 50-50 model somewhere in there.
And did all of the spaces for the mixed income?
No.
No.
That's what I'm saying. We have available space in the mixed income classroom at Berkeley Campus Delta.
That's such a precious school. The little
Yeah.
teddy bears are so cute.
Let me keep going down
I love
from this
that
list.
school.
This is a point that we've talked about many times, and it's small, but I do want to bring it up now. Transportation for the Blair Middle School specialty program. I know that it's been brought up in discussion before. Are we planning to provide transportation to those
We're going to
students this
do
year?
our level best to pull
Okay.
it off. It may have to be a combination of taking a bus from home to a hub site and getting picked up from a hub to the school.
Okay.
We don't have the capacity in this current 4-stagger system and the number of runs what it takes the time to run the 4 staggers to be able to dedicate a bus as we've done with ADL and Ghent. You know, the complaint has been around ADL and Ghent sharing buses. When you have district-wide programs that don't have an associated attendance zone for, that is an extreme burden on the transportation. I will remind the district, even though the district has moved in that direction, Blair was never designed to be a district-wide specialty program. It has morphed into such, and we're trying to retrofit transportation into it. But do know that once we tried something like hubs, not everybody's going to be happy. And I share in the concern that our folks being left out of the program because of the lack of transportation.
Yeah.
But who would excel in those programs. But here and again, pre-me, the district started marketing Blair as a district-wide specialty program, and that was never the intent of that program.
Okay, but, it's district-wide now, and it's good to hear that you guys are still looking towards trying to make it happen, however it might end up. I'm happy to hear that.
Some hubs for Ghent?
Not that I'm aware of.
They share with ADL, so
But
common
they don't-
neighborhood
it isn't
stops.
Don't they, because I know.
They still have dedicated stops. They don't have door-to-door.
Right, so, okay.
Okay, so I wanted to go back to a comment that you had made earlier about conversations that you were in as far as the St. Paul's Quadrant update. You had said that you needed direction from the board on Ruffner.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
It is difficult for us to say today what the status of the 4 schools will be until we have a greater certainty of timelines associated with the St. Paul's transformation. The only potential window that we have is 187 units in Phase 1 of Tidewater Gardens. We certainly know that the city is looking for this somewhere 3, 5, 10-year project to cover all of the 3 public housing entities. And that being the case, that leaves us with a level of uncertainty as to when will Phase 2 start. If the city is awarded the CNI grant, then when will Phase 2 start? And what would that mean for that second number of houses, in residences in Tidewater Gardens? So it's nothing that I need from the board at this time. What I said is I can't come back to the board with a definitive set of recommendations on how best to address the building issues. Cooperative Strategies, Tracy Richter and Dennis Footy and others, along with the work that I do and others do, are at the table with the Planning Commission and all of that. So we have voices in understanding what's going on, but I have not made a commitment to the city of anything other than the fact that the board took an action last February to pivot toward Booker T being the comprehensive CTE high school. Beyond that, We just simply, we talk about the facility condition and the fact that when they talk about the flooding mitigation along Tidewater Drive and Bramilton, that in heavy rain times or flooding times, that becomes Lake Tidewater Park. And so certainly going forward, if the city is going to put money into another elementary school in that area, I wouldn't recommend it would be on the current site, given the flooding potential. So all of that is what we continue to navigate, but when we get to certain points and milestones, I will continue to keep the board updated.
Okay, thanks. And finally, I really do appreciate the work that you all have done with the pay and comp study, and I hope that this is a promise to our teachers and staff to let them know that we are committed and we hear them in their concerns about their salaries, the steps, and trying to compete with other school divisions. With our step going up, are we still the highest paying school division for entry-level teachers coming into the division?
The pay and comp study showed that in the beginning, the first 4 or 5 steps, we were pretty much neck and neck. So it wasn't about who was on first. We were pretty much neck and neck in this region. It was only once you got past step 10 that we began to really take off. So we're pretty comparable.
But the $44,200
Puts us in the same range
Oh,
with
the
our.
same range, okay, all right, thank you. Ms. Martin, and then Ms. Basine, and then Ms. Campson, and you have to get me if you, okay. Ms. Martin? Yeah.
Following up to this, Mr. Jordan's comments and Dr. Gabriel's comments is really arisen, brought up a lot of uncertainties that we have in the next several years. And so I just want to bring up something that we seem to have roped ourselves into, given that we changed the start times, and that is the athletic field lighting. And if I remember, that figure's around $3 million, somewhere in that range. That will be, it's going to come up again, over the next year. And so I'm wondering if that, it just seems so insignificant compared to other things we have to do, but I know it's important for safety and other reasons. So I just would like to know if you've thought of a plan on how we're going to get that funding or phase in that funding in some way.
Have not worked on the specific plan. We certainly know that will fall in the capital improvements. And so that will emerge through some of our CIP recommendations coming forward.
Okay. Ms. Basine?
I forgot my question. So I'll come back
Threw you
to
off
it.
with the lights.
All right, back to my question was on the pay steps. What I heard a lot back in the fall were fourth-year teachers who were not seeing much difference or practically none between the new teacher that just walked in the door and their pay. So is there a workout that would tell me, I know the new teacher walking the door is making $44,200. What's a 4-year teacher making?
Give me just a second. Pearl is already on hers.
Yeah.
If we look at the example about
But
the effect of the increase of the
Oh, yeah, the health insurance is a perfect example of a person who's already on 4
Did it
going to
have
5.
Did it have the pay on that one? I missed that.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you. What page was that?
It's on 33.
Oh, the one I have tabbed, but I currently didn't look at it very closely. Okay.
Okay.
A teacher that's gonna be on step 4 is gonna be making $2,096 per pay period. And if the starting salary is $44,000, so that would be, hold on one second. The pay period is $2,000, so it's a $96 difference for a starting teacher per pay period now.
Right.
But so $96 if you've been here teaching you're at step 4, so you have been here 3 years.
Not necessarily. Remember, in the old compression,
Oh, that's right, that's why, so simply put
that's
step 4
why
been there.
that's why it's so difficult on those front ends.
I know.
Now, what we also have addressed, and we were sharing, you heard Ms. Ingram say earlier, the value of the steps is different depending on which step. So the difference of pay between step 1 and 2 is 1.25% in the proposed. But when you get up into other levels, past step 10 and all, you could be as much as a 2% difference or a 2.5% difference on the other levels. So the challenge is we were moving folks on steps now, but we are also moving to try to put money into the value between the steps in steps 1 through 4.
Okay.
Those were the movement between steps was low. This is one of the conundrums that you face in a pay and comp study. And where do you put your money? Do you put your money in your novice folks to get people in the door, and you compress your veteran teachers, or do you help your veterans and try to keep that experience and quality there? What we've done with the pay and comp study is, because folks who had been with the district were subject to the compression, we put the money into the folks who have been here. When you look at other school district steps, there's less than 1% difference between steps 1 and 2. And so while they get you in there, they don't do the formalized compression that we had in place by saying you were on the same step for 4 years. But the amount of growth between steps is less than a percentage point. Our goal is to grow to the point that the differential between the steps on those first 4 steps is at the 2%. This year with the changes, we get it to 1.25%. And so our goal is to continue to increase that space. But we've tried to take care of the folks who have stayed here through that compression by putting the value of the step for those folks as being higher than what it was for those at the beginning, and allows them to move along at that rate.
I think my concern at step 4 is when you become a continuing contract person, which is, and that seems to be when we sometimes lose people. And I heard from a number of teachers when I came on board who were the 4th year teachers, that seemed to be the area. What's the exact amount that a 4-year teacher makes?
It's what you see here. It's the 2,000. This is what would be for FY20, would be that 2096.62 times 26 pays. Times 20.
It's how much?
46,126.
So it's about 2,000 more.
Yes.
Okay.
And because now that teacher who was 4th year at the beginning of this year with a successful evaluation would go to 5th year. Mm-hmm. The differential between steps 4 and 5 could be more than the 1.25%, so they would see a little bit more.
Do we still have the pay scale sheets that we used to get?
Yes, we do.
Could you provide those for the board?
I can provide the current ones until the budget is adopted. We don't have what the new ones will look like.
That would help me. Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did have, well, I'll save it for the board discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Basine.
I remembered. So with the later start times and the adjustments with the staggers, do you foresee that being an opportunity, that time being an opportunity to consider transportation not only for Blair, the Blair Specialty Program, but also we've talked in the past about some of our schools that may be impacted by significant weather events, which we have a lot, such as around Booker T. And we've talked in the past about adding buses to support those schools and those students.
So to the latter part of the example of Booker T, here's where we face some of the unknown impacts based on timelines for St. Paul's.
Right.
Because the number of students who have to cross Tidewater Drive will begin to reduce based on the number of folks that move out of the area. Mm-hmm. And so we certainly will continue to look and see, what could happen there. But again, we're about to face the impacts of 187 families, and we would have to look. We know of those 187 families, I think there were roughly 400 students in those first 187. And so, but that's pre-K-12.
Yeah.
So you know, so that's how we evaluating that.
Right, and I use Booker T as an example, but is that the only area in the city where we might be in that situation?
No.
Okay.
So
that
the board has a walk ride policy of the distance that you walk to school before you're eligible for transportation, and when transportation begins. There's also in place policies, excuse me, policies where if there are certain hazards, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk a lot, this is what happened. Certain hazards where we won't allow folks to cross. So herein has been the long-standing, last couple of years, issue with Hampton Boulevard. You have parents who want their students to cross Hampton Boulevard and in that area to attend Blair and more and others, but there's no fixed median. It is not a safe route. The district determined that that was not safe many years ago, and therefore we provide that transportation. So we look at where are some safety issues. Certainly, there's some individual items that have come to our attention this year that we look at those on a case-by-case basis. Is this a new hazard? Because the routes have been developed, and at one point there may not have been anybody living on that side of a block. And so it wasn't, that was school age, and so it wasn't a hazard. And so when those change, we have to go back and reevaluate. That's the importance also of having this second routing manager, because right now we only have one person who does all of this routing and navigates that. And so this will help us to begin to look at all of it. As we said, committed to in the previous board meeting, this time will allow us to look at all of that in total and see what were our best options.
Dr. Boone, we got the extra money from the city last year for the GPS, and that's already in the budget for this year. And
it continues for next year.
And it continues for next year. And so where do we see that getting implemented to help with the transportation?
The GPS doesn't help with transportation. It just says where the buses are.
Right, but I mean, do you think that it would factor into any efficiency after?
In terms, no, the routing system itself determines the efficiency. When you put in the addresses and the routes, of course, the module tells you, okay, this is the most efficient route. But then we know the hazards and the things that we have to go in, and then we have to go in and make those adjustments or whatever else happens. So the GPS doesn't impact our routing system at all.
Okay, all right.
And did you say that's going to be fully implemented in September?
Which one, the GPS?
The GPS.
Yes.
Yeah, GPS, the RFP, we should be awarding sometimes next month.
Oh, so we get to run it through some.
They'll be
get
getting
parents
to
used to it?
installation and things of that
And
nature.
it'll work like the one in the beach where parents will be able to go in and check where the buses are?
I'm against that, by the way. That's a discussion we need to have in policy, or otherwise.
Well,
Well,
regardless of that.
You're looking to.
'Cause we know where they are.
You're looking to offer an entity.
We will, right, we're at the contract stage
Yeah, we're
now.
at the contract
We have
stage.
vetted all the various options, met with vendors, had done a formal RFP. Now, the evaluation of those responses to the RFP will
Okay.
occur, and then award will be done.
Okay. So are there any other questions on the operating budget that we have for right now? Okay. Dr. Boone, can you give us just a little overview of how the CIP budget, how that will be kind of broken down and presented, just for some of the new members to understand how that's different?
The capital improvement budget is the CIP budget, and that's separate from the operating. We do it in a couple of ways, and we'll bring it back to the board. The facilities committee, we asked to help us vet major projects and things that go on with that. But we would put in place, just similar to this, recommendations that we may have for school maintenance projects and improvement projects that meet the threshold of a capital project, such as a roof, or any new construction, or any rehabilitation and those types of things. And so we bring that to the board as a separate presentation, of course, a lot shorter, and look at it over a couple of years.
Okay, and do we think we're gonna do that presentation on, March the 6th?
No.
No, okay.
No, we're just dealing with operating. Our requirement is to get the operating budget to council
Okay.
at this point,
So when will we see the capital one?
later in the spring.
In the spring, all right. Okay, we're good? Operations? Okay, thank you very much.
And we'll
Dr.
just
Boone.
stay seated here because
Yeah,
no other
that's-
seats. So
that's fine.
we'll stay here.
Okay. Okay. So, the school board has a very small sliver of what the operational budget is, and I wanted to take this time to have a discussion about items that we were thinking about within our school board budget to comment on. Right now, the line item stands the same in the budget. There haven't been any adjustments made. But if there are adjustments that are suggested, we can take this time and any time after we have this discussion to come back to it, to talk about it. So, as a part of our financial documents, I believe at some of the board meetings, some of our formal meetings, Mr. Butts had been putting on those documents just for the board members to see how we've been spending our money year to date. And we're pretty much in alignment with where we have been with our spending. You'll have one document that you have with the purple Post-it note that is the actuals and the 2020 request, which at this point in time is unchanged. So what I'd like to do then is, I have a clarifying question, but God bless you.
Spreading.
Wash those hands, folks. Wash those hands, all right. I'd like to just go around, get everyone's comments, questions on our budget, and then I'll end with some of my comments, so. Questions?
So this one is the board one, right?
Yes, you have this one, which is like a high level overview, this one right here.
Okay.
So,
That you have.
high level overview, and then you have a couple of documents, which are what we've spent year to date. Thank you for providing these two, by the way, this is very helpful. Okay,
I have some.
okay, all right.
So, first, I had called with some questions around looking at the actuals, the sheet with the purple tab on it. Under fiscal year 2018 actuals, there's a significant jump from the budget of $72,000 to $120,000. And I just wanted the full board to have the benefit of why that is. So I was going to ask if Mr. Tao could explain what happened in that area, why we see the big jump from 72,000 budget to 120, now back down to 72.
Oh, okay.
Give you the breakdown of what we paid in 2018.
Well, just the general, as I understood it, there were some things that were paid in advance. And so I just want you to be able to explain to the board why that's the case.
The 120,000, let's see, 76,600 is for the council grade city schools. 37,900, I think that's your membership dues, and the 38,000 is for, it says course development for training.
Could you
That's-
give me that breakdown again? I'm sorry.
Okay, 37,868 for membership dues to Council of Great City
Is
Schools.
that for everyone's membership or just a couple of
The
select?
district.
That's the board.
The board, so,
Based on enrollment.
okay.
All right, and then 38,701,000 is for course development for training.
Did we get any of that this year?
Is that the
we use that any this year?
VSBA one?
VSBA,
That's VSBA one, right?
No, that's a
Oh,
different
this
one.
is
That's
Great
Council of Great City
Mhm.
Schools.
And I'm sorry, just for clarity, are you talking about the breakdown of the $120,000?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna start with the Council of Great City Schools.
So that was the first one.
Yeah.
So that would, just that alone was
We didn't put those reviews in there, but
70,000.
73
76,000.
6,000, just for
Oh.
that one organization.
Mhm.
I don't know what the course
And
that's
that was the
expensive.
difference between the 72,000 and the 120,000?
Not yet. I'm gonna
Okay.
give you the VSBA next.
Okay.
All right, the next one for VSBA, it's a total of, hold on, I can see, $30,128. 13,200 is for the membership dues, and then 13,189 is for the course, professional development, course
How much was the professional development?
13,189.
13,000? Seen that one. Okay.
Mhm.
And then 3750 for policy services,
What is that?
VSBA policy.
policy.
It's what we use, yeah.
How do we use it?
We use it, we get it every, yeah.
Oh, those updates that come?
Yeah.
That's the policy service.
No, those are maybe,
No.
yeah.
So could I try to explain? Our policy manual, can be housed in two ways. Either we create everything from scratch, meaning that when the General Assembly or the state board make changes, then we would have to track those and make those amendments. The VSBA policy service then captures all of the legislative and other changes, and they send us 3-4 times a year a group of policies that have been adjusted either at the state board level and or the legislative level for districts to consider to review and see if they need to be updated. So we subscribe to the policy service that allows us to be regularly updated of what changes are coming to policy. And then the policy committee that's supported by Dr. Birdsong, as well as our policy that's maintained online, gets updated. So outside of when the board asks us to review certain policies for aspects, the other policies that are reviewed are based on changes to those policies. And certainly Mr. Cloud can chime in. He's a greatly involved in that also.
Well, the whole policy manual is the
Instead of those
VSBA's
big blue
policy
ones we
manual.
used to have that were about this
Yeah.
big.
Those are all,
Okay, that's fine, I don't want to see those anymore, I'm on board.
so they update it, but also you're paying to continue to use them.
And that- so
Even when they're
it's
not
online,
updated, they're
so-
copyrighted.
So a principal that's looking for a policy now, instead of going through that big,
It's on board docs.
they just go on board docs.
And it's been there for years. It didn't just, the blue books didn't just go away. They've been there a while.
Okay. Okay, so you
My
were
only,
asking
my
a
only point
question.
was,
Uh-huh.
so if you look across the years, it's a relatively stable line from 75,300 in the original budget 2016 to about 72 where we are in our current request. I just raised the question because in the 2018 actuals there was a bump, and I think the bump was because we had paid some, as these bills come in to pay your dues, that the bump was that we went ahead and did some things in 2018 or 2019 we paid some things in advance. That's basically what it was?
The only thing I can tell you is the description, that's what's on the requisition, and it says course development training, so I can.
Okay, well, maybe we need to get some
Yeah.
additional
I need to get
clarification.
We'll get some more clarity. We'll get some more clarity.
But we're, if you don't mind, we're a member also of CUBE, right? And so,
The CUBE
part of
membership
NSBA.
comes through the Council of Great City Schools. I mean, excuse me, National School Board Association.
School Board
So-
There's
Association.
12,975
Okay.
here for 2018 for CUBE membership,
12,900 and
75.
for CUBE membership.
The other main item I have shared with you all over the last several weeks, the example of the cooperative agreement that the Virginia Beach has with the city council and their school board pertaining to legal services. And I sent that again to you today. I would like for us to consider as part of our budget request to include advancing a similar cooperative agreement between Norfolk Public Schools and the City Council. At this point, it doesn't necessarily mean that any increase is occurring, but what the agreement does, it quantifies from the city side how much is being provided from the city to the school board for legal services. It addresses the city council and the school board recognizing the potential for a conflicting interest, but that between the city council and the school board may arise and how that should be dealt with. It assigns particular attorneys. There's a annual update on legal services and cost and those types of things. And I think we should go down a path of having a cooperative agreement with legal services similar to as we've done with our funding formula, and I think may also exist with Rex Parks and Open Space, so we can begin to understand as a board how much legal services we are utilizing, be able to get a report on those services, and then have a process by which we can evaluate on an annual basis, as they do here in Virginia Beach, on the any changes that we may want to recommend associated with those legal services.
Mr. Cloud, did you want to address any of those points at all?
No, other than, of course, the decisions about how to provide the legal services is a decision for the council will have to make. And as Mr. Jordan said, it's a contract with between the school board and the city council of Virginia Beach. I know that one would be right now, they're actually, you are charged nothing for legal services. And as part of the beach's operation, they actually do, like Mr. Jordan said, charge. I can't remember now. It's maybe $300,000 or $400,000 a year for a certain number.
Yeah, in this agreement, it was pretty much $571,000.
So that would buy almost over half of my reading specialist.
Well, it's just what is allocated.
Is that with a private entity, or is that as they contract through the city
This is between
attorneys?
This is between the city and the school board. So the school board chair signs and the mayor signs in their particular agreement.
The school board pays for certain city attorneys. The other aspect of this would be that right now, most of the insurance for the school system in Norfolk is covered through the city's self-insurance program, whereas in Virginia Beach, the Virginia Beach School Board purchases a lot of private insurance, and that's why they then have private attorneys that handle all that litigation, because the attorneys are picked by the insurer. So that would also be a big potential change in Norfolk, to the extent that if the board were going to go with private insurers as opposed to continuing to fully participate as they do now in the city's self-insurance, it would also require private attorneys, which you would pay for through the cost of your private insurance. And then the insurer picks the attorneys. Right now, the city attorneys handle pretty much all of your litigation, because ultimately it's all paid for by the city through the city's self-insurance. I think you have some insurance for things like minor bus accidents and things like that are handled actually by private insurers and private attorneys, although I think my office sort of monitors that for you, just to kind of keep an eye on it. But there would be a lot of particulars that would have to be discussed and negotiated between the school board and the city council.
And just for clarity, I wasn't going down that path. I was just simply looking at the cooperative agreement. If you look at the city's budget at times, they will identify in-kind services or other services that they provide to the school system, and then they will put a number on it. And so I think that in a cooperative agreement, we would be able to go down the path and begin to quantify and qualify what we have. And oftentimes when we recognize what we're paying for, we also tend to be more judicious in how we use it.
So are you asking for a report on how much the services are that we are currently getting right now? Would that be a first step?
That may be a part of the process. I mean, for me, the first step is I just like the board to read it and review it and see if it's something that the board would support. And then we can work through the nuances of it as we go through our process.
Okay. Ms. Smith?
I'm glad you did clarify that, because I kind of heard the rumbling. I was going to say, although it's not a line item on the public schools budget, there's still a cost associated with the services that we're receiving.
Absolutely.
Ms. Campson?
All right, I'm looking at, I was looking at things like equipment maintenance contracts, that's $5,000, which we haven't even spent yet this year. As far as I know, all we have is a copier.
That is the quick charges for the copier.
5,000 for a copier?
Well, you spent,
No, I'm looking, isn't this the actuals that I'm in?
yes.
All right, so where was it?
You spent in 2017, 4,884. We just level funded your requests. Those are the copies that you make using the copier.
Every copy?
There's a
Oh,
charge.
the copies.
It's click charges.
Oh, those are the ones I keep getting emails from my home one. HP's like, you've exceeded your. All right, so we do actually use that much. Yeah.
You gotta pay for the copies.
Okay, so
Okay.
that one, okay. So that is something we do pay for, okay. And what about the 106,000 for punch contract services?
Right? You
What's
want
that?
the breakdown of that? Let's see. Hold 1 second.
So I've got only 0 use so far on that 5,000.
Which one are you on?
Purchase.
Purchase, not punch.
Purchase.
I was like,
Fourth from the
where?
bottom.
Punch list. Fourth from the bottom, okay.
Yeah, because I'm seeing a
Didn't
lot
we
of this. It
just
seems
hire a
like maybe we
purchasing
have
person that's gonna save us a lot of
a
money?
lot of stuff left over in the PD travel. And we're in what, end of February, so we're March.
Yeah, some of that is reports that haven't been paid yet. And then also last year, when we were anticipating the fact that we knew we were going to have four new board members, we were trying to prepare for our professional development as a team. So as part of the professional development, board governance training, and providing additional professional development supports for the board, previous board tried to allocate resources in preparation for that need, and that's why that's there.
Also, 42,000 of the 106 is for the legislative liaison contract.
Okay, I was gonna say,
Vantage.
that, there's
As long as
something
I see
else for
what it
that
is, so I
bump,
know.
yeah.
That's the purchase
42,000.
contract.
That's
Yeah.
for,
Advantage
And that
strategy.
goes
for
under what? What
Advantage.
does that one go under?
Purchase service.
Under the 106,000.
Okay, and that's a big chunk of that. Again, I know we need that. But it just seems like the whole travel, and I understand what you're saying now, and maybe it's like you over-anticipated what we would need then.
Well, the idea was anticipate, I'm not speaking for him, but I want to answer something else on this.
Okay.
The idea was anticipating with new board members, would there be additional conferences and things such as the new board member orientation and other things that board members would be participating in this first year, and then being able to go forward and make decisions about what you would like to participate in the past, going in the future. When we go back to the initial thing about the $50,000 increase on the line item that had been stable, what we were able to accomplish last year was prepaying memberships because we had some vacancy savings due to the clerk's position. And we just prepaid it. So the line item was technically that same 70,000, 60-some thousand. We just prepaid a couple of things because we had some vacancy savings at the end of the school year. So that's what, so that's, I wish. So that's how that came up. So the budgeted line item, the actual would have been that 67. Okay? So we still may see a little bit of end of the year savings in that account because we prepaid some things. It just depends on whether or not other expenses will absorb that.
What happens to the money that's left over at the end?
Some get absorbed to do, like that one, we did some prepayment of some things that the board may have on target. Items like that. And then in the end, if we have actual money after the audit, then we have to ask for reappropriation from the city for those one-time funds.
Okay.
So should we look at doing some adjustments?
Well, that's, I mean,
there's a lot in there for travel.
This is an opportunity for us to ask the questions about our budget, and then if there are items that you want to take out, add,
Well, I think my concern
then
with the
that's where
travel,
we're supposed to have a discussion.
the travel's 98,690. Now, I understand they added extra for this year. We haven't used near that. You know, my question is, you know, there's 7 of us. Now, when Dr. Boone goes with us for training, does that come out of your budget or ours?
My budget.
Your budget. Okay. So if we divide that by 7, that's a lot of money. Maybe we need to budget ourselves on the travel a little bit.
You're adding-
Obviously, we always are because we got a lot left over. That seems like a lot.
You're adding the meals and the transportation,
Yeah,
that's
it's
where you got
it's
the
all part of the
78,000.
travel.
Yeah,
I added them and I get $98,690. Now, if I went down to the one from before, it would be less than that.
Yeah, and that was actually my question was, I had a couple, if you don't mind, before we get into the 46,000 to the 58,000, why is there that increase?
At the time when we developed this, we tried to level fund your budget, so we just put it in professional development until you guys decide what you're gonna do with your 2020 requests.
So the 20,
Because when you add 46, 24, and 24, that's close to like 90-some thousand, so.
okay.
See, in order to present you a balanced budget tonight, we have to do some placeholders, so.
It's a placeholder until you guys decide what you're gonna do.
And then where doesn't the position of the clerk and the deputy clerk, is that now coming from our budget as well?
Was.
That's correct, but it's not included because regardless, we have to budget for their position. I mean,
Right.
I can provide you the salaries and benefits and all that, but
Because, yeah.
typically for the departments, I only ask them to handle part-time and
Non-personnel.
non-personnel costs.
Okay, so, but within our budget, though, that we've seen an increase, to cover the personnel.
You've had savings in the last half of last year and the first half of this year. The deputy clerk is a stipend, not a full-time position, so
Okay,
therefore,
stipend.
that's not an FTE.
And
So
it's
the
not that
stip-
much, is it, the stipend he gets?
Well, the stipend is coming from our budget, but his, position is from the
Superintendent's office.
superintendent's. Okay, I'm just trying to understand where the money is coming from which pots.
Oh, right. And
Okay, that's what I'm trying to
That's our
understand.
pay also. So none of the salary stuff is on here.
None of
Yeah,
the salary
okay.
stuff is there,
Yeah, okay.
That would bump
because
us up.
those are non-discretionary funds.
Like
looking
at a
at-
school, I did not ever
You're-
do anything with the salaries.
You-
Okay, thank
Your,
you.
your conversation this evening is about the discretionary
Right.
funds
Okay.
in those various
Right.
areas and where you would like to see the funds
Okay.
align.
All right. How many math and reading specialists can we squeeze out of this?
I hope,
Seriously.
respectfully, we aren't gonna start down that road
No.
tonight. Thank you. That is not healthy.
But seriously, are there areas where we can cut, where we can tighten the belt a little bit?
Yeah, we're asking everyone
We
else
are.
to cut.
We are,
I think
so.
we could cut down this PD stuff some. I mean, if I divided that by 7, that's a lot per
Are you,
person.
Ms. Basine?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, well,
I
you
wasn't sure if you
oh, I'm
were thinking or if you were asking a question.
No, we are a new board, and, you know, as we consider cuts, I sincerely hope that it's not in our professional development. We've talked over, well, I should say over the years, those of us that have been on the board, we've learned how our training and professional development has a direct impact on student achievement. And so for the new board members, I hope that you'll consider that as you think about areas to cut and areas to support. And I hope that professional development is one of those areas that we continue to support.
And I respect what you're saying, and I understand. It's just when I think $14,000 each for professional development,
Is that what it comes out to when you divide it by 7?
$14,098 and some change, just seems like so much compared to what we're giving to our principals and our teachers. I mean, I know I'm
Well,
always on
and-
that track, but I
and-
look at it always from that point of view.
Well,
We all have
and-
our lens.
And Ms. Campson, I'll take us back to a conversation we had a while back on this. 100% of the opportunities for professional development for teachers don't fall in one line item and in one budget area. Now, when we do district-wide professional development, there's a cost for that, such as the guided reading training or training for CTE teachers when they go. It comes from a lot of different pools. But on average, school districts spend probably less than 1% of their total budget on professional development, and that's why we always get hit when businesses look at us and say, well, why haven't you done this? Because we haven't deemed the value of that. So we squeeze every dollar that we can to maximize the opportunity for teachers and others, both in district training, school level training, as well as the opportunity to go to other places. So it's not all in one place there.
But I understand that. I just want to, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I just want to be sure that, you know, it just seems like so much for 7 people. And I'm a big person with PD. I think that's what we need to be pushing in. Our teachers need it. I just maybe think we have a little bit more than our share.
Looking at the time, well, would the suggestion be then to restore it to the FY 18 levels?
No.
May I?
I don't know. I'm just saying.
Let me add.
Continue
Oh,
the
Mr. Jordan
conversation.
said he's trying to get in the conversation.
Oh, okay.
I'm just ready to go.
If I may, just a second. I think the quality of the professional development is where we should focus versus the quantity. Because what I've heard several times is that it's really important that we try to attend a meeting together so that we can hear the information, we can discuss it, and then we can have something that we have all heard and we can talk about it and we can bring that back. And so I think that we have several conferences on our schedule, and not all of us can make all of the conferences. That's a given. But if maybe we can commit to fully funding at least 2 of the conferences as a total board, and then consider a cut from there, then that might be something that we can consider. Because I think it's more important that we all maybe commit to 1 or 2 versus having a commitment for every single one of us for every single conference that we've had on date. And there might be a conference that comes up that we hadn't anticipated, and that might come up. So, and we might want to go and do that. So, hold on, I'm going to go Ms.
Yeah, I
Basine,
think she was first.
Mr.
You
Jordan,
always
then Ms.
beat me.
Campson, and then Ms. Smith, and then we are
here.
very, very short for time.
Well, I'll respectfully actually defer to Mr. Jordan since I already asked a question. I mean, I
Okay.
already spoke to,
You owe me
spoke
some of
once
your
already.
time.
Okay.
You owe
So-
me a minute.
So
Go ahead.
I'm gonna
Go ahead.
yield to,
We're on the front page of the newspaper today, and I think that that story says a lot about the importance of professional development. In the 6.5 years I've been on the board, outside of going to VSBA or training we've had in-house, we've done 1 trip as a full governance team. That was to Boston with NSBA. What I was going to ask Dr. Boone, and maybe I think something the board should consider as we look at these calculations, if the administration was able to quantify the amount of staff time that is spent because of us as we work towards our efficiency and effectiveness as board members, I think you would find that because of our lack of professional development, we probably spend and cost the district far more than anything we see on this budget. And so I've been a advocate for professional development. I think we need it more than ever, and I'm just going to continue to advocate for that. If you want to cut out cell phones and how many copies we make and all that kind of stuff, I'm all for that. But I think the governance, training, and the professional development is critical, and research suggests that what happens in the boardroom affects what happens in the classroom. And so I just like for us to consider that as we continue our conversations.
I'll be quick. I agree totally with Mr. Jordan about the value of professional development. I don't think that conferences are as targeted in professional development. I think it's a good idea for the board to plan and go all together to a conference. I mean, I think that's a great idea, but how many do we need to go to? I think money's better spent the way Dr. Boone's spending it in the district, is bringing people in for us to be trained in, like, writing evaluations or...
We do both, Ms. Campson. We please don't characterize it. We don't let people go. We do both.
Oh, I'm not saying that you didn't.
Okay, I just need to clarify.
No, actually, what I was doing was complimenting you on the way
I
you were
appreciate,
using the
but
money.
I didn't want it to be a one-size-fits-all model. So let me share something from my experience as a superintendent in another district. A board who does not have the desire to address how it functions, not about attending meetings or anything else, is a board that will forever have challenges in how it comes together around what it takes for a district to be successful and how the governance team begins to share in the value of what it is that they do together for success. And I say that very respectfully, and I might as well call it out. I mean, in public, I worked in public district. In Worcester, I had a school committee that refused to do any training. And you can look at meetings there and see what the result of that is. So the meeting, the conference in itself doesn't drive the agenda. It's whether or not you have the will to figure out how we get it done together. Mm-hmm. And so I think for my 2 cents worth, because my budget is not covered there, you haven't cut mine yet, but yeah, I know it's coming. But the issue is, what is it? I'm going to drive it back the way I do with instruction. What is it that we're trying to accomplish through the system of professional development? Therefore, we then begin to see what are the things we want to invest in to help us accomplish those goals as a governance team. That's how we decide who gets to do what in professional development. So we don't do, horse husbandry or whatever else, or crocheting for whatever. But it's about what will drive the importance of how we do certain things. So when our IT folks go to an innovative conference on IT, it's about what's the next level of IT that we can bring into our classrooms that facilitate and support the teaching work as well as deliver on the results that are going forward. So I offer that to the board as a way of thinking about less about the dollars, but more about what are the goals that you all have for professional development. Where best can we get those, and how do we do? If you attend the Council of Great City Schools or National School Board Association or CUBE, you will find so many things that link to all of the accountability plan discussion that the board has. So it's not just about what I've known about instruction, what I think I know about instruction, or what I would like, but you get to go what I learn more about. You get the value of listening and talking with other peers. You get all of that in the conversation, but you also get that lift to some of the national issues that impact us, because we can't have a budget discussion or anything else when we haven't talked about the federal impact on educational policy and or spending. And so I offer that to the board, perhaps something to think about. How do you come back and set some professional development goals of what it is you want to accomplish, and then figure out what's the amount of dollars we need to put in that to work toward those goals. So I just had a conversation like I would have with my leadership team, so, for what it's worth.
I think your point is very well taken, and I believe that is where I was trying to get at, the quantity.
Me too,
The
that's what I was trying to
quality
get
of
at.
the PD versus making sure that we're hitting all of these conferences. And so, if the targeted professional development is on implicit bias training, that's a targeted professional
Mm-hmm.
development. If the, but we're running short on time right now, so we're gonna take one last comment, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
These two hit what I was gonna say, but I'll additionally add that last week, this board, was it last week? Last week, this board adopted an accountability plan that included Board of Distinction as part of it, and PD is part of that. So, just adding that on to.
So what I would ask for each board member to do is, now that we've gotten a better understanding of what our budget entails, is if you have a thought for an area that we can trim down, to share it and to share it with Dr. Boone so that we can consider it for our next discussion.
Yeah, that's you all,
Yeah.
this is you all's budget. I'm just off in thought.
So we'll share it amongst ourselves.
I mean, I can be included, but I'm just saying, I'm not.
You're gonna need to know if we're having a decrease in our budget. We're gonna have to share that with you.
Right, well, I'm hoping that if I can, next week, there is a work session on the budget to continue discussion on questions and areas of interest that the board has expressed today. We will bring as much of that work back as possible next time. I would also suggest then that you earmark a portion of that time to return to this discussion, to be able to address, and certainly anything that I can share in that discussion, I certainly will. But I think professional development is important, and when we talk about quality, I agree. But quality shouldn't just always be about what we want to hear or who we want to hear it from, but it really needs to be about what do we need to hear, even when it doesn't make us comfortable.
All right. Okay. All right, Dr. Boone, team, thank you very much for the budget presentation, and for the very good discussion that we've had. This meeting is adjourned.